I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd bring a corporate attorney to her anniversary dinner. Then again, I never thought my husband would bring his assistant-turned-mistress either. But there I was, standing in front of our penthouse, bedroom mirror on the night of our 20th anniversary, staring at a woman I barely recognized anymore. A woman who held the power to destroy the empire my husband thought was his alone. The black designer dress I'd purchased 3 weeks ago, a Valentino with intricate gold threading that caught the light when I moved, hung perfectly on my frame. I'd lost 15 pounds in the last 8 months. Not from some desperate attempt to recapture my husband's wandering attention, but from the constant gnawing anxiety of discovering what Victor had been hiding. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The weight loss had hollowed my cheeks, sharpened my jawline, and given my once soft features an edge that wasn't there before. At 45, I looked both younger and older somehow, my body more toned from the relentless training sessions I'd poured myself into, but my eyes carrying a hardness that came from too many sleepless nights spent poring over financial documents I was never meant to see. I applied another coat of Chanel Rouge Allure in Pirate, a blood red that matched the bottoms of my Louboutins, and perhaps the mood for the evening ahead. Sophia, I whispered to my reflection, tonight, you take back everything. The text message from Victor had arrived precisely as I'd anticipated. Running late with investor meetings. Meet you at La Maison at 8:30. Don't wait for me at home. The same excuse he'd been feeding me for months. Only this time, I knew exactly where he really was and who he was with. More importantly, I knew what they were planning. My executive assistant, May, the one Victor had insisted I didn't need, had delivered the dossier to me 4 days ago. She'd placed it on my private desk with a sympathetic look that told me she already knew its contents would shatter whatever illusions I still maintained. The financial investigator sent these over, said you'd want to review them before your meeting on Thursday. I'd hired the forensic accountant 6 weeks earlier after finding a draft shareholder agreement in Victor's briefcase when he was in the shower. An agreement that completely erased my founding stake in Artemis Technologies, the company we had built together from nothing. The photos inside the dossier showed Victor leaving the offices of Blackthorn Ventures, his arm confidently wrapped around a woman who couldn't have been older than 28. She had sleek platinum blonde, hair that hung just above her shoulders, a willowy figure accentuated by designer workwear, and the kind of calculated poise that came from believing the world would always bend to your ambition. The investigator had identified her as Camille Laurent, Victor's executive assistant who had been quietly promoted to Strategic Partnership Director 3 months ago, a position that hadn't existed until Victor created it just for her. I hadn't cried when I saw the pictures. I didn't throw things or scream or call Victor immediately to confront him. Instead, I felt an icy clarity wash over me. 20 years of marriage, 17 years building Artemis Technologies into a billion-dollar cybersecurity firm. And this was how it would end? Not with the dramatic boardroom confrontation most betrayed executives fantasize about, but with a calculated plan that would leave nothing to chance, especially not my 58% controlling interest that Victor had been systematically hiding from investors, partners, and apparently his mistress. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor Santiago, the corporate attorney I'd consulted 3 days ago. Reservation confirmed for 9:15. Just text when you're ready for me to arrive. All documents prepared as discussed. Perfect. Victor and I were booked for 8:30, which would give me plenty of time to confront him before Eleanor showed up with the coup de grace. I slipped my phone into my Bottega Veneta clutch along with a small USB drive containing copies of all the evidence I'd gathered over the past 6 weeks. Corporate formation documents showing me as primary founder and majority shareholder. Banking records revealing the elaborate shell structure Victor had created to obscure ownership. Board minutes he'd falsified. Emails discussing how to dilute. my stake without my knowledge. Recordings of him telling investors he was the visionary founder of Artemis, when I was the one who had developed the core encryption algorithm that made our company worth 9 figures. I slipped on my heels, 6-inch, stilettos that made me as tall as Victor, and took one last look at myself in the mirror. My dark hair was styled in a sleek, low chignon, not a strand out of place. My makeup was flawless but understated, except for the red lips that signaled battle. I looked like a woman in control, and for the first time in months, I actually felt like one. The private elevator down to our waiting town car was quick and silent. Raphael, our driver for the past decade, knew better than to engage me in conversation tonight. He'd worked for our family long enough to have undoubtedly noticed the growing tension between Victor and me. "We've arrived, Mrs. Reyes," he said. As the car glided to a stop in front of La Maison, the Michelin-starred French restaurant where Victor had proposed to me 21 years ago. "Would you like me to wait?" "No, thank you, Raphael," I replied, handing him an envelope containing a check for $50,000, a bonus I'd decided he deserved for his years of loyalty and discretion. "Take the rest of the weekend off. I've arranged for another ride home tonight." His eyes widened slightly when he felt the weight of the envelope, but he simply nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Reyes." "Sophia," I corrected him gently. "I think we've known each other long enough for that." He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen directed at me in weeks. "Sophia, have a good evening." The maitre d' recognized me immediately as I entered the restaurant. "Mrs. Reyes, how lovely to see you. Mr. Reyes has not yet arrived, but your table is ready. Would you like to be seated or wait at the bar?" "I'll wait at the bar, thank you." I needed a drink anyway. Something bracing enough to steady my nerves, but not so strong that it would dull my senses. I needed to be razor-sharp tonight. I settled onto a plush velvet bar stool and ordered a gin martini, extra dry with a twist. As I sipped the cold, crisp liquid, I replayed the plan in my head one more time. I would wait until after we'd ordered, then casually bring up the subject of Artemis's upcoming Series C funding round. No accusations, just innocent questions, designed to make him squirm. Then, just as our main courses arrived, I'd show him the first document. By dessert, Eleanor would make her entrance, and the real show would begin. The restaurant was filling up quickly, the soft murmur of expensive conversations and the subtle clink of fine crystal creating a soothing backdrop to my tumultuous thoughts. I was midway through my martini when I saw them enter. Victor was wearing the bespoke Tom Ford suit I'd given him for Christmas last year, the one he said was too formal for everyday business. His dark hair, now artfully threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, was perfectly styled, and he'd clearly just had a fresh shave. He looked handsome, powerful, every bit the successful tech CEO he portrayed himself to be. The role he'd perfected while I built the technology that made it all possible. And beside him, her arm linked through his with casual intimacy, was Camille, Laurent. The blood drained from my face as I watched them follow the maitre d' toward our table, our anniversary table, laughing together about some private joke. Victor hadn't even bothered to scan the restaurant, hadn't even considered that. I might already be here, watching this betrayal unfold in real time. This wasn't part of the plan. He was supposed to come alone. We would have our confrontation, and then Eleanor would arrive to deliver the final blow to his carefully constructed house of cards. But this, bringing her to our anniversary dinner, this was a level of arrogance I hadn't anticipated. I downed the rest of my martini in one gulp and signaled for another. My hand was steady as I reached for my phone and texted Eleanor, "Change of plans. He brought her with him. Come now." Her response was immediate. "On my way. 15 minutes max?" The bartender placed a fresh martini in front of me. "From the gentleman at the end of the bar," he said with a nod toward a silver-haired man in a tailored navy suit, who raised his glass slightly in my direction. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. On any other night, I might have been flattered by the attention. Tonight, I simply nodded my thanks and turned back to watch the drama unfolding at my anniversary table. Victor and Camille were now seated, their heads bent close together as they examined the menu. His hand rested on hers atop the table, not even trying to be discreet. The maitre d' approached them, and I saw a momentary flash of panic cross Victor's face as the man said something to him. Victor looked around the restaurant frantically, and I knew he was searching for me. Our eyes met across the crowded room. His widened in shock, then narrowed as he said something to Camille and stood up. He made his way toward the bar, his expression morphing from surprise to anger, to a carefully constructed mask of casual concern. "Sophia," he said as he reached me, his voice low and controlled. "I didn't expect you to be here already." "Clearly," I replied, taking a deliberate sip of my martini. "Happy anniversary, by the way." He had the decency to flinch. "I can explain." "Save it," I cut him off. "We both know there's only one explanation for why you brought your strategic partnership director to our anniversary dinner." My voice was calm, almost conversational. "How long has it been going on, Victor? 6 months? A year?" He glanced back at the table where Camille sat, now visibly uncomfortable as she realized who I was. "This isn't the place for this conversation." "On the contrary," I said, sliding off the bar stool and picking up my drink. "I think this is exactly the right place. After all, you chose it. Let's not keep your date waiting. Sophia, I insist." "I insist," I said, already moving past him toward the table. I felt him trailing behind me, helpless to stop what was coming next. Camille's face drained of color as I approached. She was younger up close, probably not even 30, with the kind of flawless skin that comes from youth and expensive skincare regimens. I could see why Victor was attracted to her. She was beautiful in an obvious way, with wide blue eyes and full lips that parted slightly in surprise as I took the empty seat across from her. "You must be Camille," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Sophia, Victor's wife and the actual founder of Artemis Technologies." She looked at my outstretched hand as if it might bite her, then reluctantly shook it. I didn't know we were meeting Mrs. Reyes tonight." I smiled sympathetically. "Of course you didn't. Don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else." Victor slid into the chair between us, his face flushed with anger. "Sophia, that's enough." "Oh, I'm just getting started," I said, reaching into my clutch for the USB drive. "Would you like to see the photos the investigator took of you two leaving Blackthorn Ventures? Or should we start with the corporate formation documents showing that I own 58% of Artemis, not the 12% you've been telling everyone?" Camille's eyes darted to Victor, who had gone completely still. "You had me followed?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had my suspicions confirmed," I corrected him. "There's a difference." A waiter approached our table, oblivious to the tension. "Are we ready to order, or do we need a few more minutes?" "We'll need," Victor began, but I cut him off. "I'll have the foie gras to start, followed by the duck confit," I said, handing the menu to the waiter without looking at it. I'd memorized my order days ago. "And please bring a bottle of the Chateau Margaux, the 2010 vintage." "Excellent choice, madame," the waiter said, turning to Victor and Camille. Victor ordered mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. Camille mumbled something about the salmon, her voice small and uncertain. As the waiter left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I took another sip of my martini, relishing the moment. "So, Camille, tell me about yourself. How long have you been sleeping with my husband while helping him steal my company?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "Look, I'm sorry." "No, you're not," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "You're just sorry you got caught. There's a difference there, too. Victor leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. Sophia, can we please discuss this privately? This is embarrassing for everyone. Embarrassing? I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. Is that what you call it when your husband of 20 years brings his mistress to your anniversary dinner, while simultaneously trying to erase you from the company you founded? Just embarrassing? I didn't know it was your anniversary, Camille whispered, her face crimson. Of course you didn't, I said, suddenly feeling a twinge of pity for her. She was young, probably thought she was in love, believed whatever narrative Victor had spun about our marriage and my role at Artemis. Victor had always been persuasive when he wanted something. He probably told you I was a silent partner, right? That the company was his vision from the start? Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. How much does she know, Victor? I asked, turning my attention back to my husband. Does she know about the prenup you signed? The one that says you forfeit all shares in any business we build together? If you cheat? Does she know about the whistleblower complaint that's about to be filed with the SEC? Or how about the fact that the encryption algorithm that powers our entire platform, the one you've been taking credit for, is patented in my name alone? Victor's face had gone from red to white. How do you know about the SEC? He asked, his voice barely audible. I know everything, I said simply. I've always known everything. I just chose to ignore it until now. The waiter returned with our wine, going through the ritual of presenting the bottle, pouring a taste for Victor to approve, then filling our glasses. As he left, I saw Eleanor enter the restaurant, exactly on schedule. She spoke briefly to the maitre d', who nodded and pointed in our direction. Who is that? Victor asked, following my gaze. That, I said, raising my glass in a mocking toast, is Eleanor Santiago, my corporate attorney. Victor's eyes narrowed. You brought a lawyer to our anniversary dinner? Well, I countered, lifting my glass. You brought your mistress. I thought we were changing traditions. Camille looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. I should go, she murmured, reaching for her purse. Oh no, I said, my voice pleasant but firm. Please stay. After all, you're a key part of tonight's festivities. Eleanor reached our table, her imposing figure drawing stares from nearby diners. At 5'10", with broad shoulders and the confident bearing of a woman who regularly faced down opponents in boardrooms and courtrooms, she made quite an impression. Sophia, she greeted me with a warm smile, then turned a considerably cooler gaze to Victor and Camille. Mr. Reyes, Ms. Laurent. She pulled up a chair from a nearby empty table and sat down, placing her briefcase on the floor beside her. You know her name, Victor said flatly, realization dawning. How long have you been planning this? Since the shareholder agreement draft, I replied honestly. Though I must admit, I didn't expect you to make it quite this easy for me. Our appetizers arrived, the elegant presentations at stark odds with the tension at our table. No one moved to eat. I've taken the liberty of having these papers drawn up, Eleanor said, opening her briefcase and removing a thick document. It's a fair settlement, all things considered. You retain your current position as CEO for a transitional period of 6 months, with a 15% ownership stake in Artemis. Sophia reclaims her rightful position as chairwoman of the board and chief technology officer, with her 58% controlling interest publicly acknowledged. Victor stared at the papers, then at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. You can't be serious. Deadly serious, I replied. You broke our agreement. Victor, 20 years ago, you promised to be faithful, to honor our partnership, both marital and professional. In exchange, I built the technology that made us wealthy, allowed you to be the public face of our company, and turned a blind eye to your increasingly late nights at the office. I held up my end of the bargain. You didn't. This is insane, he sputtered. I'm not signing anything. Eleanor smiled thinly. That's your prerogative, of course. But before you make that decision, I should inform you that Sophia has documented evidence of your affair, your attempts to dilute her ownership, and has witness testimony from 3 board members regarding your misrepresentations about Artemis's founding and intellectual property ownership. Victor's face paled further. What witnesses? You'd be surprised how many of our investors' wives confide in me, I said quietly, especially after a few too many glasses of champagne at charity events while their husbands are nowhere to be found. You know her name, Victor said flatly. Realization dawning. How long have you been planning this? Since the shareholder agreement draft, I replied honestly. Though I must admit, I didn't expect you to make it quite this easy for me. Our appetizers arrived, the elegant presentations at stark odds with the tension at our table. No one moved to eat. I've taken the liberty of having these papers drawn up, Eleanor said, opening her briefcase and removing a thick document. It's a fair settlement, all things considered. You retain your current position as CEO for a transitional period of 6 months, with a 15% ownership stake in Artemis. Sophia reclaims her rightful position as chairwoman of the board and chief technology officer with her 58% controlling interest publicly acknowledged. Victor stared at the papers, then at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. You can't be serious. Deadly serious, I replied, picking up my fork and cutting into the perfectly seared foie gras. You broke our agreement, Victor. 20 years ago, you promised to be faithful, to honor our partnership, both marital and professional. In exchange, I built the technology that made us wealthy, allowed you to be the public face of our company, and turned a blind eye to your increasingly late nights at the office. I held up my end of the bargain. You didn't. This is insane, he sputtered. I'm not signing anything, Eleanor smiled thinly. That's your prerogative, of course. But before you make that decision, I should inform you that Sophia has documented evidence of your affair, your attempts to dilute her ownership, and has witness testimony from 3 board members regarding your misrepresentations about Artemis's founding and intellectual property ownership. Victor's face paled further. What witnesses? You'd be surprised how many of our investors' wives confide in me, I said quietly, especially after a few too many glasses of champagne at charity events while their husbands are nowhere to be found. Camille, who had been shrinking further, into her chair with each exchange, finally found her voice. I don't understand. What does any of this have to do with me? Nothing and everything, I told her, taking a sip of wine. You're just the final straw, Camille. The mistake he couldn't hide or explain away. I turned back to Victor, whose arrogance had given way to naked calculation as he began to understand the full extent of what was happening. I could practically see the wheels turning behind his eyes, looking for leverage, for an escape route, for the upper hand he'd always managed to find in tough negotiations. Let's discuss this rationally, he said, his tone shifting to the smooth, persuasive voice he used in boardrooms. Whatever you think you know about Artemis's ownership structure, it's more complicated than that. The Series B reorganization changed everything. The reorganization you deliberately kept me from attending? I interrupted, my voice cool. The one where you falsified my signature on the consent forms? That reorganization? His eyes widened. How did you— The digital signature expert I hired was quite thorough, I explained, taking another bite of my appetizer. The metadata on those documents shows they were created 2 days after the meeting, using a template of my signature from our mortgage refinancing papers. Eleanor opened a folder from her briefcase. We have the forensic report here, complete, with timestamps and access logs showing that only your executive account accessed those documents before submission. That's circumstantial at best, Victor countered. But I could hear the hollowness in his defense. Perhaps, Eleanor conceded, but coupled with sworn statements from Maria Chen at Beacon Capital and Jonathan Park from Summit Ventures confirming you explicitly told them Sophia owned only 12% of the company while seeking their Series C investment. Well, the SEC tends to take false representations to investors rather seriously. Camille looked increasingly distressed. Victor, you said Sophia was just a silent partner who helped with early development. You said she'd been fairly compensated years ago. Is that what he told you? I asked, genuinely curious. That I was paid off and sent on my way while he built the company? She nodded miserably. Did he also tell you that the encryption algorithm powering our entire security suite, the one we licensed to 17 Fortune 100 companies, was my doctoral thesis at MIT? That I spent 4 years perfecting it before we even founded Artemis? Victor cut in sharply. That's enough, Sophia. No, I don't think it is, I replied, turning to Camille. You should know what you're getting into. Victor likes to rewrite history to suit his narrative. Today, you're the brilliant strategic partner he can't live without. Tomorrow, when he's done with you, you'll be the overpaid assistant who contributed nothing of value. The waiter returned to clear our appetizer plates. I noted with satisfaction that I was the only one who had eaten. Victor's white-knuckled grip on his wineglass suggested he was barely maintaining his composure. Camille looked like she might be ill. Would anyone care for another glass of wine? The waiter asked. I think we're fine for now, Eleanor answered smoothly. Thank you. As the waiter departed, Victor leaned forward, his voice lowered to a harsh whisper. What exactly do you want out of this, Sophia? Money? Revenge? To humiliate me publicly? What I want, I said carefully, is acknowledgement of what is already mine. My role as founder. My majority ownership. My place at the head of the company I built. And if I refuse, Eleanor interjected, then on Monday morning we file a complaint with the SEC detailing securities fraud. File an emergency injunction freezing all company assets pending ownership verification, and release to all major business publications the evidence of your systematic attempt to erase Ms. Reyes from her own company. Victor's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone, opening an email draft, addressed to editors at Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and TechCrunch. The subject line read, Embargoed until Monday. Artemis Technologies founder exposes years of fraud by CEO husband. Does this look like a bluff? I asked, sliding the phone toward him. He glanced at it, then pushed it back without comment. Something had changed in his demeanor, a slight shift from disbelief to calculation. This was the Victor I knew well, the tactician who never accepted defeat without searching for an angle. You realize what this will do to the company, he said, not as a question, but as a warning. Our Series C round is 3 weeks away. If you create this kind of chaos now, the valuation will plummet. Investor confidence will evaporate. You'll be the majority owner of a dramatically less valuable company. It was a good attempt at leverage, appealing to my business sense, my years of work building Artemis. But I'd anticipated this move. Actually, Eleanor replied before I could, we've already spoken confidentially with your 3 lead investors. They're aware of the situation and have indicated they're comfortable proceeding with Sophia at the helm. In fact, Marcus Whitfield from Sequoia specifically mentioned that having the actual technical founder actively involved again would likely increase their commitment. Victor's eyes flashed with genuine surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. You're lying. Marcus would have told me. Why would he? I countered. You've been lying to him for years about who really created the technology he's investing in. When presented with evidence that the person he thought was a minor contributor is actually the primary inventor and majority owner, why would his first instinct be to warn you? Our main courses arrived, providing a momentary respite from the tension. The duck confit was placed before me, its aroma rich and enticing despite the circumstances. Victor's steak and Camille's salmon similarly appeared. though I doubted either had much appetite. "I'd like to make a counter-proposal," Victor said after the waiter left, his tone measured as if we were discussing a routine business matter. "A clean split. You take 40% ownership, public recognition as co-founder, and a board seat. I retain CEO position and operational control. We issue a joint press release announcing the restructuring as a mutual decision to better leverage our respective strengths." For the first time that evening, I laughed genuinely. "You're still negotiating as if you have leverage, Victor. It's almost admirable." "I'm being practical," he insisted. "You may own 58% on paper, but you haven't been involved in operations for years. The executive team reports to me. The sales pipeline runs through my relationships. The technical roadmap that's failing to deliver on the quantum-resistant encryption we promised Northrop last quarter," I interrupted. "The one where your team is 3 months behind schedule because they've been trying to patch my original algorithm instead of implementing the updated version I completed last year." His expression revealed I'd hit a nerve. "How could you possibly know about the Northrop timeline?" "May isn't just my executive assistant," I said simply. "She's been our director of technical operations poker buddy for 6 years. People talk, Victor, especially when they're worried about promising what they can't deliver." A flash of anger crossed his face. "So, you've been spying on company operations?" "I've been keeping informed about the company I own," I corrected. "There's a difference." Camille, who had been silently watching this exchange like a spectator at a tennis match, suddenly stood up. "I need some air," she murmured, grabbing her clutch. Victor reached for her arm. "Camille, wait." She pulled away from his grasp. "Don't. Just don't." With that, she headed toward the restaurant's entrance, her posture rigid with controlled distress. "Let her go," I advised as Victor half rose to follow her. "She needs time to process that she's been sleeping with a liar. It's a painful realization." His eyes locked with mine, genuine fury replacing his calculated charm. "Is that what this is really about? Punishing me for the affair?" "No, Victor. The affair is just a symptom of who you are. This is about reclaiming what's rightfully mine before you could steal it completely." He sank back into his chair, fingers drumming against the tablecloth as he recalibrated. I'd seen this exact expression countless times over 20 years. The slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth. He was searching for his trump card, the leverage point he hadn't yet played. "You know," he said finally, his voice eerily casual, "there's something you haven't considered. If you push this, if you force this very public, very messy confrontation, have you thought about what it will do to Mia?" The mention of our daughter's name hit me like a physical blow. Mia, 19 years old and in her second year at Stanford, had always idolized her father. The thought of her discovering his betrayal, both personal and professional, through press coverage or industry gossip made my stomach clench. Victor, sensing he'd found his opening, pressed forward. "She sees me as successful, as someone who built something significant. How do you think she'll feel learning that her mother is tearing it all down?" Eleanor, observing my momentary hesitation, placed her hand gently on my arm. "We don't have to discuss family matters right now," she said pointedly, but Victor had found his rhythm now. "And beyond the emotional impact, think about the practical implications. The trust fund we established for her is largely an Artemis stock. If the company value tanks because of this fight, you're not just hurting me, you're decimating her financial future." I took a slow, deliberate sip of wine, using the moment to compose myself. When I set the glass down, my hand was steady. "I've already spoken with Mia," I said quietly. Victor's confident smile faltered. "What?" "Yesterday, I told her everything. About the affair, about your attempts to erase me from Artemis, about tonight's confrontation. I didn't want her hearing any of it secondhand." "You had no right," he hissed, color rising in his face. She's my daughter. Too, I reminded him. And unlike you, I respect her enough to tell her the truth, however painful. She deserved to hear it from me directly, not through press coverage or campus gossip. She wouldn't believe you, he insisted, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. I showed her the evidence, Victor, all of it. The photos of you and Camille, the falsified documents, the original Artemis code with my comments in the margins. I paused, watching the realization dawn on his face. She's brilliant, our daughter. Takes after me that way. She understood immediately what you'd done. Victor's face had gone ashen. What did she say? That's between me and Mia, I replied. But you should know that I've already restructured her trust fund. Her financial future is secure, regardless of what happens to Artemis stock in the short term. Eleanor cleared her throat gently. We should return to the matter at hand. The settlement agreement requires your signature tonight, Mr. Reyes, or we proceed with the SEC filing on Monday. Victor sat back in his chair, the fight visibly draining from him. For the first time that evening, perhaps for the first time in our marriage, I saw him without his carefully maintained facade. No charm, no calculation, no confidence. Just a man who had overplayed his hand and was finally facing the consequences. You've thought of everything, he said, more statement than question. I had to, I replied simply. I was fighting for my life's work. Our waiter approached again, his professional demeanor never wavering despite the obviously tense atmosphere at our table. Would anyone care for dessert? Before Victor could respond, I smiled at the young man. Yes, the chocolate soufflé for 3, please. They take about 20 minutes to prepare, correct? Yes, madame. Excellent choice. As he departed, Victor looked at me with narrowed eyes. Why are you ordering dessert? Do you really think we'll be sitting here amicably 20 minutes from now? I set down my fork, finally giving up the pretense of enjoying my untouched duck confit. Because, Victor, I want you to have time to read the full agreement before signing it. Despite everything, I'm offering you a fair deal, fairer than you deserve, and I want there to be no question later that you were coerced or rushed. Considerate of you, he said bitterly. Pragmatic, I corrected. I've spent 17 years building Artemis. I'm not going to let it be derailed by claims that the settlement wasn't properly executed. Eleanor slid the document across the table. Page 4 outlines the ownership restructuring. Page 7 details the transition plan for leadership. Page 12 addresses the public announcement and narrative. Victor didn't touch the papers. Instead, he stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Did you ever love me? He asked suddenly. Or was I just a convenient frontman for your technology? The unexpected vulnerability in the question caught me off guard. For a fleeting moment, I saw echoes of the man I'd married. Brilliant, ambitious, but not yet corrupted by his own success. The man who had once stayed up all night helping me debug code before a critical investor demo, who had celebrated with genuine joy when my encryption algorithm passed its first security audit. I loved you, I said softly, the truth of it surprising. Even me. For many years, I believed in our partnership, our shared vision. But somewhere along the way, you decided that being the face of Artemis wasn't enough. You wanted to be its sole creator, its owner, its visionary. You wanted my work, without me attached to it. He didn't deny it. Instead, he finally reached for the document and began to read, his expression unreadable. The restaurant had begun to empty around us, the late dinner crowd thinning as the hour approached 11. Through the front windows, I could see Camille, pacing on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, her body language radiating distress. She's probably calling a ride, Eleanor observed, following my gaze. Smart woman? Smarter than I was at her age, I agreed quietly. It took me 20 years to see Victor clearly. Victor looked up sharply. I'm sitting right here. Yes, I acknowledged. Finally forced to face the consequences of your actions. It's an unfamiliar position for you, isn't it? Victor continued reading the agreement, occasionally pausing to ask Eleanor for clarification. His practiced composure was returning, that familiar mask of cool professionalism sliding back into place. I'd seen it countless times in difficult negotiations, the ability to compartmentalize, to push emotion aside and focus solely on the transaction at hand. It was one of the qualities that had made him such an effective CEO. This non-disparagement clause, he said, tapping page 15. It's too restrictive. I can't agree to never discuss the circumstances of this restructuring. Eleanor leaned forward. You can agree not to publicly misrepresent Sophia's role or ownership. That's the core requirement. The specific wording is negotiable, within reason. He made a notation in the margin. And this 6-month transition period, it's not long enough. The board and executive team are used to my leadership. Abruptly shifting power dynamics could destabilize operations right before our Series C. The transition timeline is flexible, I conceded. But the immediate public acknowledgement of my position and ownership is not. Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded and continued reading. The tactical retreat was another familiar move, giving ground on minor points to secure more important concessions. I found myself admiring his negotiation skills, even as they were, being deployed against me. Whatever else he was, Victor Reyes was a formidable businessman. The restaurant door opened, and Camille re-entered, her face composed but her eyes reddened. She approached our table with surprising dignity, considering the circumstances. I'm leaving, she announced, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. I've called a car. Victor half rose. Camille? No, she interrupted sharply. I have nothing to say to you right now, but I do have something for Mrs. Reyes. She reached into her clutch and removed a small flash drive, which she placed on the table in front of me. You might find this interesting. It's every document and email Victor asked me to help prepare regarding the ownership restructuring planned for after the Series C. Victor's face went pale. Camille? You can't? I already have, she cut him off, her voice cold. You told me Sophia had willingly stepped back from the company. You told me she was being fairly compensated. You made me complicit in your fraud. She turned to me. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I picked up the flash drive, turning it over in my fingers. Thank you, Camille. This was unexpected, she nodded curtly. Considerate professional courtesy from one woman to another. With that, she turned and walked away, her shoulders squared, her stride purposeful. Victor stared after, her genuine shock registering on his face. She wouldn't, he whispered, almost to himself. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. It appears she just did. I slipped the flash drive into my clutch, curious about its contents, but disciplined enough not to show too much interest in front of Victor. Whatever was on it could be reviewed later, after our current negotiation was concluded. The sudden chirping of a phone broke the tense silence. Eleanor checked her device, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to genuine concern. I need to take this, she said, standing abruptly. It's Marcus Whitfield. Victor's head snapped up at the mention of our lead investor. Why? Is Sequoia's managing partner calling my wife's attorney at nearly 11 on a Friday night? Eleanor stepped away from the table, moving toward a quiet corner of the now half-empty restaurant. Through the ambient noise, I could catch only fragments of her conversation. Unexpected timing. Preliminary statement. Damage control. A cold knot of unease formed in my stomach. Something was happening. Something outside our carefully orchestrated confrontation. I glanced at Victor, who was watching Eleanor with narrowed eyes, his fingers tapping a rapid, agitated rhythm against the tablecloth. What have you done? I asked quietly. He looked back at me, his expression unreadable. Nothing. Yet, Eleanor returned, her professional composure intact, but a new tension evident in her posture. She leaned down to whisper in my ear. There's been a leak. TechCrunch has received an anonymous tip about leadership disputes at Artemis. They're planning to run a story Monday morning. My mind raced through possibilities. Had Camille sent information? To the press already? Had one of the board members broken confidence? Or? I studied Victor's face carefully. Had my husband deliberately set this in motion as a contingency plan? We need to move quickly, Eleanor said in a normal volume, reclaiming her seat. The timeline has compressed. Victor's eyes darted. Between us. What's happening? I decided on transparency, at least for the moment. Apparently, news of our situation is about to break. Someone has contacted the tech press. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face before he masked it. Either he was an exceptional actor, or this development was as unexpected to him as it was to me. Who? He demanded. Anonymous source? Eleanor replied, her tone neutral, but her gaze assessing him carefully. Victor's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at the screen, then back at us with dawning comprehension. It's Miles Chen from the board, and 3 missed calls from PR. He tapped out a quick response. What exactly is happening, Sophia? I think we're both being outmaneuvered, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place. Who else knew about your plans for Artemis after the Series C? His expression darkened with realization. Blackthorn Ventures. They've been pushing for a restructured cap table as a condition of leading the round. They wanted my ownership diluted, I guessed. He nodded reluctantly. They thought having a silent partner with majority ownership was a liability for future growth. And when did you last meet with them? Yesterday, he admitted. They wanted assurances that the ownership issues would be resolved before they committed to the full investment. Eleanor leaned forward. And did you provide those assurances? Victor hesitated, then sighed. I told them it was being handled. The waiter approached with our soufflés, the perfectly risen chocolate domes incongruously elegant amid our rapidly unraveling plans. None of us acknowledged them as they were set before us. So Blackthorn likely panicked when they saw you with Camille tonight, I reasoned. They assumed you were moving forward with whatever plan you'd discussed, not realizing I was already aware and taking countermeasures. And now they're trying to force our hands with a press leak, Eleanor finished, creating public pressure for a quick resolution. Victor's phone buzzed again. This time he answered, stepping away from the table to speak in hushed, urgent tones. I caught fragments. Contained situation. Coordinated response. No comment. Until Monday. Eleanor used the moment to update me rapidly. Marcus says 4 different outlets have received tips in the last hour. The story is positioned as a leadership struggle at Artemis before the Series C. Your name isn't mentioned yet, but questions are being raised about ownership structure and governance. This changes our approach, I said, mind racing through scenarios. We need to get ahead of this. Agreed. But it also gives us leverage. Victor can't afford a public dispute now, not with investors and the press already circling. Victor returned, his expression grim. PR is fielding calls from Bloomberg and the Journal. We need to issue a statement tonight. Convenient timing, I observed coolly. Almost as if someone wanted to force my hand. This wasn't me, he insisted. And for once, I believed him. His controlled panic seemed genuine. This hurts me as much as you. The company's valuation is secondary to establishing the truth, I finished for him. Which is that I am Artemis's founder and majority owner. He stared at me for a long moment, calculation evident in his gaze. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. You're right. We need to present a united front, at least until this immediate crisis passes. I hadn't expected such a reasonable response. Agreed. I propose a joint statement. he continued. We acknowledge your founding role and majority ownership position, the previous miscommunications as administrative oversights being corrected, and emphasize our continued partnership for Artemis's future growth. It was a clever pivot, reframing his systematic erasure of my contributions as mere administrative errors, while positioning himself as part of the solution rather than the problem. But it was also pragmatic, potentially saving Artemis from a damaging public battle. Eleanor, reading my hesitation, interjected. We'd need specific language about Sophia's role going forward, not just acknowledgement of past contributions. Of course, Victor agreed too quickly. Co-founders with clearly defined responsibilities. You as Chief Technology Officer and Chairwoman, me continuing as CEO. We emphasize the harmony of the arrangement. While I sign this agreement confirming my 58% ownership and control, I added, tapping the document he still hadn't signed. His smile tightened. With perhaps some adjustments to the transition timeline, given the circumstances. Before I could respond, both our phones chimed simultaneously. We glanced down to see the same text from our PR director. Urgent. Reuters reporting potential leadership dispute at Artemis. Need statement within 30 minutes or they run with what they have. Victor looked up, genuine alarm in his eyes. 30 minutes. We don't have time for a complete renegotiation. Then sign the agreement as is, I countered. We issue a statement, confirming my role and ownership, and handle the details of the transition privately. I need some assurances first. His voice was steady despite the pressure. Specifically, I need to know you won't terminate me immediately once this is signed. The company can't afford that kind of disruption right now. It was a fair concern, albeit a self-serving one. I glanced at Eleanor, who gave a slight nod. I'll add a codicil guaranteeing your position for at least 3 months, with termination only possible for specific causes, she said, already drafting the language on her tablet. That gives us time to stabilize the situation and prepare for an orderly transition. 6 months, Victor countered. 4, I offered, with performance metrics clearly defined. He considered this, then nodded reluctantly. Acceptable. And my ownership stake? 15%, as specified, Eleanor said firmly. That's already generous considering the circumstances. Victor's phone rang again. He glanced at it, then silenced it without answering. 18%. I've built this company for 17 years, regardless of who created the original algorithm. My relationships and leadership have value. I considered pushing back, then realized the practical truth. The 3% difference was insignificant compared to my controlling stake, and this minor concession might smooth the path forward. 18%, I agreed, contingent on successful completion of the Series C round and seamless leadership transition. Eleanor quickly drafted the additional terms while Victor and I sat in tense silence, the chocolate soufflés cooling untouched before us. Outside the restaurant windows, I noticed a young man with a professional camera lingering near the entrance, likely a photographer hoping to capture images of whatever tech industry drama was unfolding inside. This is going to be a media circus, I murmured, nodding toward the window. Victor followed my gaze and grimaced. Vultures. They smell blood in the water. They smell a story, I corrected. One we need to control. Eleanor slid the amended agreement across the table. Final version. Your signature on pages 4, 9, 16, 22, and the codicil on page 23. Victor took the document and began signing each marked page with deliberate care, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he slid it back to Eleanor without comment. Now for the statement, I said, pulling out my phone. I'll draft something and send it to PR. We should coordinate our language, Victor insisted. I'll call Miles and have the board prepared for questions. I began typing a concise statement acknowledging my role as founder and majority owner, while positioning the announcement as a clarification of Artemis's leadership structure. rather than a correction of Victor's misrepresentations. It was diplomatic enough to preserve company stability while establishing the truth. As I worked, I noticed Victor watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between resignation and grudging respect. "You know," he said quietly, "you'll be good at this. The public role, the leadership position. Better than I expected." I looked up, surprised by the almost compliment. "I created Artemis, Victor. I've always been capable of leading it." "Yes," he acknowledged, "but you let me take that role. For years you stayed in the background, focused on the technology while I built the business. I trusted you to represent us both," I said simply. "That was my mistake." He nodded slowly. "And now we both pay for it with this public spectacle." "Not both," I corrected. "You're facing consequences for your actions. I'm reclaiming what was always mine." Victor's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then stood abruptly. "Blackthorn is issuing their own statement in 15 minutes. I need to call them." "What are they saying?" Eleanor demanded. "That they're reconsidering their investment given unexpected governance concerns," he quoted bitterly. "They're using this as leverage to demand better terms." I felt a flash of cold anger. They were perfectly happy to invest when they thought, "You were stealing my company. Now that the truth is emerging, they have concerns?" "Welcome to venture capital," Victor said dryly. "Ethics are flexible when valuations are at stake." For the first time that evening, we found ourselves in complete agreement. "Call them," I instructed. "Tell them they can either maintain their original commitment under the actual ownership structure, or they can watch Sequoia increase their stake while we find a replacement for their portion." Victor raised an eyebrow. "You'd let Sequoia take a larger position?" Marcus Whitfield recognized my value immediately when the truth was presented, I reminded him. "He deserves the opportunity. Blackthorn does not." A faint smile touched Victor's lips. "That's exactly the approach I would take." "I know," I said. "We were good business partners once, before you decided my contribution wasn't worth acknowledging." Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or just calculation of a new angle. "We could be again, given the circumstances." I shook my head. "No, Victor. We'll be professional colleagues during this transition. Nothing more. You've demonstrated exactly how much your word is worth." He accepted this with a slight nod, then stepped away to make his call. Eleanor leaned toward me, keeping her voice low. "Are you all right with him handling Blackthorn? He could undermine your position." I considered this. "He won't. Not now. His own interests are aligned with preserving Artemis's valuation through this crisis. And frankly, he's better at handling difficult investors than I am. At least for now." "You're being remarkably pragmatic about working with a man who tried to steal your company," she observed. "I'm being strategic," I corrected. "Victor remains valuable to Artemis during this transition. I won't let personal feelings interfere with what's best for the company I built." My phone chimed with an incoming call, May's number. I answered. "Quickly. I've been monitoring the situation," she said without preamble. "Reuters has agreed to hold their story for our statement. PR has drafts ready for your approval. And Mia is on the other line. She saw something on Twitter and is concerned." My heart clenched at the mention of my daughter. "Tell her I'll call in 20 minutes. Everything is under control." Understood. Also, Marcus Whitfield is requesting a breakfast meeting tomorrow. 8 a.m. at his office. "Confirm it," I instructed. "And May? Thank you. For everything." "Just doing my job," she replied, but I could hear the smile in her voice. As I ended the call, I noticed Victor returning, his expression grimly satisfied. "Blackthorn is reconsidering their reconsideration," he announced. Amazing how quickly. Concerns about governance evaporate when Sequoia expresses interest in increasing their position. And the statement? They've agreed to coordinate messaging with our PR team. No mention of ownership disputes, just a standard quote about their excitement regarding Artemis's refined leadership structure. Good, I said, rising from my chair. Then I think our business here is concluded. Victor glanced at the untouched soufflés. We didn't even get to dessert. Some anniversaries don't deserve to be celebrated, I replied, gathering my clutch. Eleanor collected the signed documents and placed them securely in her briefcase. I'll have copies delivered to your respective councils in the morning. Victor nodded, then looked at me with an unexpected intensity. Sophia, despite everything, I am sorry. Not for trying to secure my position, he clarified quickly, but for how I went about it. For involving Camille. For bringing her tonight. I studied him, trying to gauge the sincerity of this partial apology. You're sorry you were caught, I concluded. Not for what you did. He didn't deny it. Would you have preferred I lied about that too? No, I admitted. At least there's finally some honesty between us. As we prepared to leave, I noticed several more photographers had gathered outside. Our private drama had become public spectacle faster than I'd anticipated. We should leave together, Victor suggested pragmatically. Present a unified front. It was the sensible approach, however distasteful. Fine, but don't touch me. Don't pretend this is anything but a business arrangement. Of course, he agreed, and for the first time that night, reached for his wallet to settle the bill. I stepped toward the door, head high, expression composed. In moments, we would face the cameras, the questions, the beginning of a new chapter for Artemis Technologies, one where its true founder finally stood in the light. Victor moved to my side, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Ready? He asked quietly. I thought of the flash drive Camille had given me, the evidence still to be reviewed, the conversations with board members still to be had, the public narrative still to be shaped, the personal and professional reckonings still to come. I've been ready for 17 years, I replied, and pushed open the door. Light from camera flashes scattered across my face as we exited La Maison. The photographers, now 5 of them, had positioned themselves strategically around the entrance, creating an unexpected gauntlet. Victor instinctively moved closer to me, his CEO persona sliding into place with practiced ease. No comment at this time, he stated firmly, his voice carrying just the right mix of authority and calm. Artemis Technologies will issue an official statement shortly. A young woman with a press badge thrust a recording device toward us. Mrs. Reyes, is it true you're the actual majority owner of Artemis? Why has this been kept secret until now? Felt a jolt of surprise. They already knew more than we'd anticipated. Eleanor moved smoothly between us and the reporter. As Mr. Reyes indicated, a formal statement is forthcoming. Please direct all inquiries to our communications department. We pushed through to the waiting car. Not Victor's usual driver, but the service I'd arranged earlier. The photographers continued snapping photos as we climbed in, Eleanor following behind us. Well, Victor said dryly as the car pulled away. That was unexpected. They already have your ownership details. Someone's been thorough, I agreed, my mind racing through possibilities. The question is, who? Eleanor was already on her phone, typing rapidly. Our statement needs to go out immediately. No point in delay when they already have the core facts. I nodded, finalizing the draft I'd begun inside and sending it to our PR team with authorization to release immediately. Done. Now we wait for the fallout. Victor studied me with guarded curiosity. You're remarkably composed for someone whose private business dealings are suddenly front-page news. I'm not the one who has something to hide, I reminded him. I've always been Artemis's founder and majority owner. The only revelation here is that you tried to erase that fact. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, turning instead to gaze out the window as we navigated the late-night traffic. The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken recriminations and calculations. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, Mia's face lighting up the screen. I hesitated, not wanting to have this conversation with Victor present, but unwilling to ignore our daughter. "I need to take this," I said, then answered before either Victor or Eleanor could object. "Mia, sweetheart." "Mom!" Her voice carried a mixture of concern and excitement. "It's all over Twitter. Someone leaked that you're the actual owner of Artemis and Dad's been—" She paused, clearly searching for a diplomatic phrase. "Misrepresenting things?" "Supplied. That's putting it mildly," she said, and I could hear the tension in her voice. "Are you okay? Is Dad with you?" "Yes to both questions," I replied, aware of Victor watching me intently. "We're handling the situation. I was going to call you as soon as things settled down. Are the reporters there? Someone posted photos of you two leaving a restaurant with some woman in a power suit." "That's Eleanor, my attorney," I explained. "And yes, there were a few photographers. Outside." Mia was quiet for a moment. "So it's true then? All of it? You're the one who created Artemis's technology?" I glanced at Victor, whose expression had grown carefully neutral. "Yes. I founded Artemis and developed the core encryption algorithm that powers our security suite. I own 58% of the company." Another pause. "And Dad tried to take it from you?" Victor's face tightened at the directness of the question. I considered how to answer, conscious of both his presence and Mia's need for truth. "Your father and I have different perspectives on Artemis's leadership structure," I said carefully. "We're working through those differences now." "Mom," Mia said, her voice suddenly older than her 19 years, "please don't do that. Don't give me the sanitized version. I deserve to know what's happening with my family and with the company that pays for my education." I took a deep breath, making a decision. "You're right. The truth is that your father has been systematically erasing my role at Artemis for years, culminating in an attempt to completely remove my ownership before the upcoming funding round. Tonight, I confronted him with evidence of this, along with my attorney. We've reached an agreement that acknowledges my position and establishes a path forward." Victor's expression darkened, but he remained silent, recognizing perhaps that any interference would only damage his relationship with our daughter further. "And the woman with him?" Mia asked quietly. "The blonde in the photos people are sharing?" "That's a personal matter," I said, not willing to expose that particular wound. In front of Victor. "Something we can discuss another time." "Right," Mia said, and I could hear her connecting the dots. She'd always been perceptive. "So, what happens now? With Artemis, I mean." "I'll be taking a more public role as chairwoman and chief technology officer. Your father will remain CEO for a transitional period. We're issuing a statement tonight clarifying the ownership structure and leadership roles. Will you be okay working together, after everything?" The question hung in the air between Victor and me. Would we? Could we navigate this professional relationship after such profound personal betrayal? "We'll make it work," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Artemis is worth it." We spoke for a few more minutes, with Mia extracting a promise that I would call her tomorrow with more details. As I ended the call, I noticed Victor staring at his hands, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "She thinks I'm a monster now," he said quietly. "She thinks you're human," I corrected. "Flawed, capable of serious mistakes. That's harder in some ways. Seeing your parents as actual people rather than idealized figures." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I never meant for her to be caught in this." "Yet here we are," I replied. "Actions have consequences, Victor, not just for you, but for everyone connected to you." Eleanor's phone chimed with an incoming message. "The statement has been released," she announced. "Initial market reaction should hit financial networks within the hour." Victor checked his own device. PR has forwarded the first media inquiries, mostly asking for interviews, confirmation of ownership details. He scrolled further. The board wants an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Already scheduled, I informed him. 9 a.m. at the downtown office. Marcus Whitfield will be joining us. His eyebrows rose. You've been busy. Unlike you, I'm not improvising this takeover, I said coolly. I've had contingency plans in place for months. The car pulled up outside our penthouse building. I had no intention of staying there tonight. A suite at the Four Seasons was waiting for me, but we needed to collect essential documents and data before proceeding. I'll wait here, Eleanor said. Take whatever time you need to gather your things. Victor and I rode the private elevator in silence, the tension between us nearly palpable. When the doors opened to our home, I was struck by how alien it suddenly felt. This space we'd shared for 15 years, filled with carefully selected art and designer furniture, now seemed like a museum exhibit of a life I no longer recognized. I'll need access to your home office, I said as we stepped inside. There are files I need to retrieve. Victor nodded stiffly. Of course, I'll be in my study. I moved through the penthouse with purpose, gathering the backup drives and paper, documents I'd hidden throughout our home, evidence I'd been collecting for months as Victor's betrayal became increasingly clear. In my office, I removed the false bottom from the antique desk drawer, retrieving the original Artemis patent applications and founder agreements that Victor thought I'd lost years ago. As I worked, I could hear him moving around in his study, opening and closing drawers, occasionally speaking in hushed tones on the phone. I wondered briefly who he was calling at midnight. His lawyer, perhaps, or maybe board members he thought might be sympathetic to his position. I was just finishing in my office when an alert pinged on my laptop, a notification from the financial news networks. I opened it to find a breaking news headline. Tech unicorn Artemis reveals surprise founder and majority owner ahead of Series C round. The article featured side-by-side photos of Victor and me, with a caption identifying me as the previously unknown technical genius behind Artemis's revolutionary encryption technology. It was surreal seeing my name suddenly thrust into the spotlight after years of deliberate obscurity. I glanced through the article quickly, noting with satisfaction that our statement had formed the backbone of the reporting. The phrase administrative oversight regarding public representation of leadership had been picked up verbatim. Victor's systematic erasure of my contributions reframed as a mere clerical error. My phone began buzzing with incoming messages. Colleagues, industry contacts, even old classmates from MIT who had recognized my name in the breaking news. I silenced it, unwilling to start responding until I had a clearer picture of the full fallout. I finished gathering my materials and moved toward the master bedroom to pack some clothes, but paused in the hallway as I heard Victor's voice, tense and urgent, coming from his study. No, that's not what we agreed, he was saying. The statement clearly positions this as a clarification, not a correction. Yes, I understand what the document says, but the public narrative is what matters now. I moved closer, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. Look, James, we need to present a united front here, Victor continued. If you start suggesting I deliberately misrepresented ownership, it undermines everything. No, she doesn't know about that account. At least, I don't think she does. I froze. What account? Was there yet another layer to his deception I hadn't uncovered? The Cayman structure is completely separate from Artemis, he insisted in a hushed tone. It has nothing to do with company ownership. Yes, some of the IP licensing revenue was directed there, but that was a legitimate tax strategy. Well, it's too late to unwind it now. My blood ran cold. He'd been funneling intellectual property licensing revenue from my encryption algorithm, into an offshore account I knew nothing about. This wasn't just about erasing my public role. He'd been actively stealing from me for years. I slipped my phone from my pocket and began recording, moving closer to the partially open door of his study. The agreement she signed tonight doesn't cover the Cayman entity, Victor was explaining. It's specifically limited to Artemis Technologies Inc. and its domestic subsidiaries. No, the licensing agreements were structured through VP Innovations, which technically isn't a subsidiary. I'd never heard of VP Innovations. Another shell company, apparently, created solely to siphon revenue away from Artemis and away from me. Look, we can discuss this tomorrow, Victor concluded. For now, just stick to the agreed statement and direct all inquiries to PR. Yes, I understand the SEC implications. That's why discretion is crucial at this point. I'd heard enough. I stopped the recording and retreated silently down the hall, my mind racing with this new information. I needed to get this to Eleanor immediately and expand the scope of our agreement to include all related entities and revenue streams. I finished packing quickly, then returned to the living room just as Victor emerged from his study. His expression was composed once more, but I could see the strain around his eyes. I've got what I need, I informed him coolly. He nodded, then hesitated. Sophia, before we go back down, there's something I should tell you. About VP Innovations and the Cayman Islands account? I asked, watching his face drain of color. You know, he whispered. I do now, I confirmed. And so will the SEC by morning if you don't immediately add those entities to our agreement and return all diverted funds to Artemis. He stared at me, calculation and fear warring in his expression. It's not that simple. The structures were created for tax purposes, tax evasion purposes, I corrected, and stolen IP revenue hiding purposes. Let's not pretend otherwise. Victor sank onto the sofa, the carefully maintained facade crumbling entirely. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely defeated. It started small, he said quietly. Just a portion of the European licensing revenue that I thought was undervalued in our compensation structure. Then it grew. How much? I demanded. He couldn't meet my eyes. About 30 million over the past 5 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. $30 million of my work, my innovation, stolen and hidden offshore. All from my encryption algorithm and some peripheral patents, he admitted. The quantum-resistant enhancement was particularly valuable in the financial sector. My enhancement, my work, my value that he had systematically diverted while simultaneously erasing my foundational role at Artemis. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that it left me momentarily speechless. I'll transfer it all back, he offered quickly. Set up a structure to return everything to Artemis, with proper attribution. With proper interest, I added coldly. And a complete audit by an independent firm. He nodded rapidly. Whatever you want. Just, please don't take this to the authorities. The company couldn't survive that kind of scandal right before the Series C. I studied him. This man I'd once trusted completely, now revealed as someone capable of sustained, methodical theft from his own wife and business partner. You're only concerned about the company? And Mia, he said quickly. Think about what this would do to her, seeing her father prosecuted for financial crimes. It was a low blow, using our daughter as a shield but not unexpected. Victor had always been strategic, even in his desperation. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. You're going to call your lawyer right now and instruct him to draft an addendum to our agreement covering all offshore entities, shell corporations, and diverted revenue. You're going to provide complete documentation of every account, every transaction, every penny that should have gone to Artemis but went elsewhere. And you're going to do it before the board meeting tomorrow morning. That's impossible, he protested. The documentation alone would take days to compile. Then I suggest you start now, I replied implacably. Because the alternative is me walking into that board meeting with evidence of your embezzlement and watching you be escorted from the building by security. We stared at each other, 17 years of partnership, marriage, and now betrayal crystallizing in that moment. Finally, he nodded. "I'll make the call," he said quietly. "Do it from the car," I instructed. "Eleanor should hear every word." We rode the elevator back down in silence, the weight of this final revelation hanging between us. When we reached the lobby, I saw Eleanor rise from her seat in the waiting car, her expression questioning as she observed our faces. As we approached, Victor suddenly stopped, turning to face me. "I never meant it to go this far," he said, an unexpected rawness in his voice. "In the beginning, we were truly partners. I believed in your vision, your brilliance. Somewhere along the way, I started believing my own PR, that I was the visionary, the indispensable leader. And I became the inconvenient founder," I finished for him. The brilliant but socially awkward technologist better kept in the background. He didn't deny it. "I told myself you preferred it that way. The lab over the spotlight, creation over promotion. Eventually, I convinced myself that Artemis was more mine than yours. And the offshore accounts? The stolen revenue? What rationalization did you create for that?" He looked away. "That I deserved more. That without me, your algorithm would have remained academic theory instead of billion-dollar technology." I shook my head, not in disagreement, but in wonder, at the human capacity for self-justification. "The sad thing is, Victor, I would have given you more if you'd asked. I valued our partnership. I respected your contributions. All of this deception was unnecessary." "I know that now," he said softly, "for whatever it's worth." Eleanor opened the car door, her expression questioning. "Everything all right?" "No," I replied honestly. "But it will be. Victor has some additional disclosures to make before our board. Meeting tomorrow?" As we slid into the back seat, I felt a curious sense of calm descend. The worst had been revealed, the final betrayal exposed. Whatever came next, the board meeting, the press coverage, the industry fallout, I would face it as Sophia Turner-Reyes, founder and rightful owner of Artemis Technologies. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying us toward a future suddenly rewritten. In the reflection of the window, I caught a glimpse of my face, composed, determined, unveiled. The woman I had always been, finally seen. The boardroom fell silent as I finished my presentation. 9 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to admiration to barely concealed panic. I had just spent 45 minutes walking Artemis's board through not only my technical contributions to the company, but also the complete evidence of Victor's systematic erasure of my role and his diversion of funds to offshore accounts. $30 million, Miles Chen, our longest-serving board member, repeated slowly. Diverted through shell companies without board approval or shareholder disclosure. That's correct, I confirmed, standing confidently at the head of the table, Victor's usual position. He sat halfway down the side, his posture rigid, his expression carefully neutral. "The funds are being returned to Artemis immediately, with interest. The full accounting is in the documents before you." Marcus Whitfield from Sequoia leaned forward. "Ms. Reyes, or should I say Dr. Turner-Reyes, I must say your encryption algorithm enhancements are even more impressive than I'd realized. The quantum-resistant protocols especially." He glanced pointedly at Victor. "It's remarkable how they've been consistently attributed to Artemis's R&D team in all official communications." A flush crept up Victor's neck, but he remained silent, as agreed. Part of our late-night renegotiation had included his complete cooperation during this meeting in exchange for my discretion regarding potential criminal charges. "Moving forward," Eleanor interjected smoothly, "we've prepared a transition plan that maintains company stability while correctly attributing technological development and ownership." She distributed additional documents to each board member. "As you'll see, Dr. Turner-Reyes will assume the role of chairwoman and CTO effective immediately, with Mr. Reyes continuing as CEO for a 4-month transition period. And the Series C round? Asked Diane Faulkner from Wellington Management. Proceeding as scheduled, I assured her. I spoke with the lead investors this morning. They're fully supportive of the clarified leadership structure. I didn't mention that 2 of the venture firms had actually increased their commitment upon learning I would be taking a more active role, a vindication that still felt surreal. The boardroom door opened and Camille stepped in, carrying a stack of financial reports. She avoided looking at Victor, instead nodding professionally to me before distributing the documents and taking a seat at the far end of the table. Her presence had been my idea, a signal to the board that we were maintaining operational continuity, despite the leadership changes. These reports detail the complete financial impact of reintegrating the offshore revenues, she explained, her voice steady. As you'll see on page 3, our actual EBITDA for the past fiscal year was 22% higher than previously reported. A murmur ran around the table. Better numbers right before a funding round was the one silver lining to this entire situation. Believe we've covered the essential points, I concluded. Does anyone have questions before we move to a formal vote on the transition plan? Miles raised his hand. Just one. What happens to the company name? I smiled. Artemis Technologies. Remains Artemis Technologies. The goddess of the hunt seems particularly appropriate, don't you think? A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension. The vote was quick and unanimous. Even Victor raised his hand in support, though his eyes remained fixed on the table. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached me one by one, offering congratulations that thinly masked their embarrassment at having been deceived for so long. Marcus lingered until the others had filed out. Sophia, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. I should have done more due diligence on the founding. Sorry, I shook my head. Victor was very convincing. He always has been. Still, I'm looking forward to working with the actual technical visionary behind Artemis. He glanced at Victor, who was speaking with Eleanor across the room. Some partnerships don't survive transitions like this. This one won't, I confirmed. Professionally, we'll maintain appearances through the Series C closing. Personally, I left the sentence unfinished. Understood. He handed me his card. Call me anytime. Sequoia is fully committed to your leadership. After he left, I found myself alone with Victor for the first time since our confrontation the previous night. He approached cautiously, like someone nearing a dangerous animal. You were impressive, he said, genuine respect in his voice. The board never stood a chance. Neither did you, I replied, gathering my materials. You taught me well, Victor. I watched you operate for 17 years. A flash of something, pride perhaps, or regret, crossed his face. What happens now? Between us, I mean. I studied him. This man I'd once loved, once trusted, who had become both my greatest advocate and my worst betrayer. I think you know the answer to that, he nodded slowly. I've already called a real estate agent about finding my own place. Good. I slipped my laptop into my bag. Eleanor will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. As I walked toward the door, he called after me softly. For what it's worth, I am sorry, Sophia. I paused, but didn't turn around. I know. That's why you still have a job. For now. Outside, the June sunshine felt appropriately symbolic. A new day, a new chapter. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. Just saw the press release. So proud of you, Mom. I smiled and typed back, Thanks, sweetie. Dinner tonight? I have quite a story to tell you. As I slid into the waiting car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. No longer the shadow behind a successful man, but the woman who had created an empire and finally claimed her throne. And now, I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker for the Women in Tech Summit, the founder and CEO of Artemis Technologies, Dr. Sophia Turner Reyes. Applause erupted as I took the stage, the spotlight momentarily blinding after the dimness of the wings. A sea of faces, mostly women, many young and eager, stretched before me in the convention center auditorium. 1 year ago, I would have declined this invitation, uncomfortable with public speaking and content to remain in the shadows. Today, I embraced it. "Thank you," I began, adjusting the microphone. "A year ago, I was invisible. The technology I created protected government agencies, financial institutions, and critical infrastructure around the world. But few knew my name. My encryption algorithms were the backbone of a billion-dollar company, but my contribution was systematically erased from its story." I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "Today, I'm here to talk about visibility, about claiming your space and your credit, about ensuring that your name remains attached to your work." As I delivered my prepared remarks, I caught sight of Mia in the front row, recording the speech on her phone. Now 20, she'd taken a semester off from Stanford to intern at Artemis, learning the business from the ground up. Her pride in watching me transform from the dutiful corporate wife to industry leader had been one of the unexpected gifts of this turbulent year. After the speech, during the reception, a young engineer approached me, clutching a dog-eared copy of the MIT Technology Review with my face on the cover. "Dr. Turner-Reyes, your story changed my life," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was about to leave tech after my team lead kept taking credit for my work. Then I read about how you reclaimed Artemis. What did you decide to do?" I asked, genuinely curious. She smiled. "I documented everything, presented it to the CTO, and got promoted. My former team lead reports to me now." I laughed, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "Well done. Never let anyone diminish your contribution." Later, as my car wound through downtown toward Artemis headquarters, I scrolled through the day's messages. Among them was a LinkedIn notification. "Victor Reyes has endorsed you for leadership." I shook my head, still marveling at life's strange turns. Victor had lasted exactly 2 months of his 4-month transition period before the board requested his resignation. The final straw hadn't been the offshore accounts or the ownership deception, both of which had been carefully managed in our public narrative, but his attempt to undermine me with key clients, suggesting I lacked the business acumen to lead. The pie. Clients had reported these conversations directly to me, and by that evening, Victor had been escorted from the building. He now ran a modest consulting firm advising startups, none in cybersecurity, and our divorce had finalized 6 months ago with surprisingly little acrimony. Camille, unexpectedly, had thrived. After providing crucial evidence during the transition, she demonstrated genuine talent for strategic partnership development. I'd moved her to a different department, away from any association with Victor, and she'd quickly become one of our most valuable executives. I declined Victor's endorsement and put away my phone as the car pulled up to Artemis headquarters, now housed in a gleaming tower bearing our name. Inside, preparations were underway for tomorrow's major announcement. Our quantum encryption platform, 3 years in development, was finally ready for commercial deployment. "The press packets are finalized," May reported, falling into step beside me as I crossed the lobby. "And the demo is flawless. We ran it 20 times this morning. And the team recognition? Front and center in all materials. Every engineer credited by name and contribution, just as you insisted." I nodded, satisfied. "That's the difference between us and Victor. He believed success came from a single visionary leader. I know it comes from recognizing every person's contribution." In my office, formerly Victor's, though I'd completely redesigned it, a framed article from the Wall Street Journal hung on the wall. "The Woman Behind the Code: How Sophia Turner-Reyes Built Then Reclaimed Artemis Technologies." Next to it was a simpler frame containing the napkin on which I'd first sketched my encryption algorithm 20 years ago, saved all this time in a box of memorabilia. The quarterly financial report waited on my desk. Our market valuation had doubled since the leadership clarification, as we still diplomatically called it. The Series C had closed at a $2.8 billion valuation, and analysts were now suggesting we might fetch $5 billion if we chose to go public. My phone chimed with a reminder, dinner with Mia at 7:02. Unlike Victor, I'd made a firm rule never to miss. Personal commitments for work. Some lessons from a failed marriage were worth heeding. As I gathered my things to leave, I glanced at one final frame on my wall, the invitation to our anniversary dinner at La Maison, preserved as a reminder of the night everything changed. Victor had brought his mistress to our anniversary dinner, not realizing his wife would bring a corporate attorney and decades of receipts. It wasn't how I'd planned to reclaim my company. But looking back, I wouldn't change a thing about that night. Sometimes, the most painful betrayals lead to the most powerful reckonings, and some anniversaries are worth celebrating after all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.